Hi, my name is Marcus Hellström. I'm one of the SC managers for Poly or for Polycom. Today I want to go through a video showing how you can use the new DMA Edge Wizard setup, a new web tool that we have to set up a DMA on your network. The configuration I will go through today is something that we call a standalone setup, meaning that it is a DMA Edge only. And this is a perfect solution to connect to our Real Connect Cloud service when you really just want that firewall traversal solution. So the setup that I will do is pretty much that I have a firewall that is blank configured. So I will walk you through the rules and everything you need to do there. I have a DMA Edge also installed and blank with basic installation. It's connected with one interface into a DMZ, which is 10.46.201 network, and it has one interface on the inside as well. And you can also see a link to the DMA wizard, which is dma-config.plcm.vc. And just go into there and you will have different options to do setups for DMA and DMA Edge. So once you logged into the wizard, you will be faced by a web interface with several different settings. The one thing that you would need to walk through is either if you're doing this for DMA that is on-premise, either virtualized or hardware in your network. But you can also, with this new feature, have a DMA Edge set up in Azure or Amazon Cloud. The second option you have to choose is which software version of the DMA you're running. As you can see here, I will be running a 10.1 version, and the next option you also have to set is how many simultaneous calls you will run through the DMA Edge server. So the number of calls will impact how many TCP ports and UDP ports and so on you would need to open up, and those will adapt dynamically. I will do a fairly small one, so 25 calls is all I need. There are some different ways you can do this setup. So as you can see here, you can either do a DMA Edge server integrated with a core server. So this is a setup you would use if you already have a DMA core server already set up. You can do a combination. So if you want to, you can run the DMA core server as an Edge server and have both functionality on the same device. And for some smaller customers and smaller setups, this would actually make sense. What you can also do, and the one I will use, is the standalone DMA Edge server. And this is pretty much that I'm just doing the firewall traversal part, and there are some features and functionality of a core DMA server that is not included. So let's continue with the standalone DMA Edge server and just hit next. So the next step would be to do endpoint provisioning for our resource manager. So pretty much if you have the resource manager on-prem and you were using it to allow external represence desktop and represence mobile to connect to your network, you could here point and do setup regarding that. I'm doing the most basic setup as a standalone just to reach our Real Connect service. So I'm going to answer no on this one and just continue. Web-based calling is our web suite solution. And again, this is something that some of our larger Real Presence platform installation have. Again, I'm going to try to keep this as basic as possible. So I'm just going to not connect to any solution like this. I don't even have it in this environment anyway. And hit next. The next option the wizard gives me is really about separating the signaling and media traffic over different interfaces. Again, this makes a lot of sense when you start to have hundreds of calls going out through your DMA Edge. I will only ever do 25 calls. That's less than 100 megs of internet traffic. So I don't really want to have them using different interfaces. So I'm going to select no on that one. The next step is really coming to configure the different interfaces. So I selected no on the earlier stage, so we can see that I'm having both management, the LAN signaling, the media traversal, and if I were using access proxy, which I actually did turn down earlier, all on a single interface. So this for me is then just a matter of entering the IP address of the network, the prefix length, and I have a bit strange one, so I have a 18, and the gateway address, and in my case the gateway is actually 2. And now the IP address of my LAN interface is configured. I can hit next. The next one is going to ask me is for the public WAN IP interface. So this is not actually the public IP interface. This is the IP address in the DMZ. So I'm going to add that. And the prefix length there is a CMask. And yeah, the default gateway is 1046.201.1, which is the DMZ interface on the firewall. And here is also where I'm going to add my NAT address. So this solution is really working around a setup where you have a one-to-one NAT address, meaning that I have one public IP address that everything signals to, that my firewall then turns into an internal address, and in the same process as this is being done, it's also applying the firewall rules. So I get the security boundary where the firewall will block any not open traffic to that interface. And my external IP address is, or public IP address is 212.16.179.81. And then I can hit next. The next step, it will ask me for some DNS information. So here you have host name and domain name and so on. So I'm going to call this DMA Edge standalone. Really short. My lab environment has demo.plcm.se, and I use the same as a search domain. The internal DNS is this IP address. I'm also adding Google because that's something I usually do. The next thing is asking for a time server. Again, this is something that I have internally. It's the same as the DNS. Here you could of course point to ntppool.org or some other time server in your environment or the customer environments. And I'm also selecting a time zone that reflects where the DMA is located, and this lab environment is located in Stockholm. Hit next. One of the last questions we get is how we want to use this DMA Edge server. And I really want to connect to our Reconnect team service. And what will happen now is you will automatically add some logic to allow this to happen. For our customers that also have internal RMXs, where our internal RMXs, there is an option to have that solution cascade out to the Teams calls, and this is for someone who has Reconnect Clarity on-prem. I'm not using that, so I'm going to leave that option as a no and hit next. So that's pretty much the wizard. I'm now facing the summary page where it says what I'm trying to do, all the answers I have done, all the IP addresses, so I can check that everything is correct. If I think there's something I need to understand better, there is a link to documentation, and I'm happy with everything is correctly entered, so I will hit submit. What happens then is that this goes out to the server, and it takes a few seconds, and afterwards I'm getting a few files that are really good to know about. And one of them is a download or a backup file. So this is actually all the configuration that I already said. So what I will do then is when I install my DMA, that I just need to do navigate to admin, backup and restore, upload this file. The DMA will reboot, and all the configuration is pre-populated, and the system is almost ready to take into service. I also have 2 reports. These reports are the ports used both inbound and outbound. So there is a CVS file. I highly recommend to download that. There is also a view report as HTML, and again I would recommend to look at that and maybe do print screens of it. Again, when you need to talk to the firewall guys, in this case I'm actually doing all the parts, so I will configure the firewall as well. But again, in that dialogue with the security team and the firewall expert, having the CVS file and that report helps them understand what needs to be set up in the firewall. So I will quickly download the backup file. I will download the CVS file. So I have them saved, and I will view the report file. So hitting that one, you can see either get a full solution with all the ports, and you have source IP, source port, destination IP, destination port, what protocol, direction, I is for internet, what interface is going to be used, and really what is there for. I would highly recommend to separate this one into separate tables, because this really shows the different call legs or the firewall configuration legs. So this shows, the first one shows all ports and everything needed to be open from the internet to the DMA edge DMZ IP interface and what it's used for. And then you have what the DMA will use for outbound configuration. Again, maybe some people are a bit lazy here and would pretty much allow their DMA to send anything out to the internet. They don't really care. If you're going to be 100% correct, I would still recommend for you to open just the port from the DMA out that you know that the system needs. And then you have the inbound private port. So this is again the DMA, any video endpoints or client on the inside network communicating to the IP interface or the LAN interface of the, in my case, of the DMA. And then you have what ports the DMA will communicate to those internal IP addresses. And in my setup, the DMA is trusted enough to be directly on the local area network, the LAN. So I will not need to set up this part. However, if you do a more secure setup, instead of having the inside interface of DMA on the LAN side, you would have it in an internal DMZ, and you would have another firewall between your local area network and that internal DMZ, and then the next interface of the DMA would be in the external DMZ, and then you would need to set up all of these ports. With that said and done, the next step is pretty much to spin up my DMA and get cracking on restoring the backup file. So I have now installed the DMA edge in my virtual environment, and I could see in my vSphere client that it came out with an IP address that was 10.46.11.8. This is a DHCP address, so I haven't touched anything. I just let the DMA boot up by default, and then it uses DHCP. You could, if you wanted to, at this point, go into the CLE config of the DMA and set a predefined IP address. This works fine because I really want to show you the out-of-the-box experience. The default login is admin and Polycom with a capital P, 12 hash $, and then you log in. The first thing you will be asked if you want to agree to send data to improve the product. I would highly recommend this as it helps make it a more stable product, as we can see if something is wrong, and you need to accept the license agreement and then you can move on. The next thing, this is a normal step when you come into a DMA that's version 10.0 or later, is it actually asks you if you're going to do a core configuration or an edge configuration. I'm doing an edge configuration, and what it will ask me if I want to hide the core configuration options from your user interface, and this is something I want to do. Really, all I want to do is get to the next stage where I can upload the backup file. So I will now go into my admin and I have backup and restore. So I will hit upload. I place the download of the download of both the report and the backup file in a folder called DMA Wizard. So I select my backup file, I hit open. It will load the backup file to the server. I will hit OK, and it will ask me how much to back up, or if I want to keep any specific settings that I already have. I will use the predefined features because that's pretty much all I have. I don't have any certificates and I don't have any history, since this is a blank system that I literally powered on a few minutes ago, and I will hit OK. I will be logged out of the system and it will then go in to do a backup, and usually we do a dual reboot as well. I'm not really sure why, and you can monitor that for your virtual tool or your console if you have that, and I will simply get back once the system is back online again. So it's now time to log into my DMA Edge that I just set up, and of course now the IP address has changed to the same that I set in the DMA Wizard. So in my case this is 10.46.7.61. And let's log in again and see what we have done with the wizard. So after logging in, we can see that we have an Ethernet 0 that is set up with an IP address. We also have Ethernet 1 with the IP address in the DMZ. Also what we can see is that right now this is not licensed at all. I will do some licensing from my resource manager to provide this with a license so we can continue everything. The interesting part, I think, is to show you that we do have setup that's been done for SIP signaling on the ports needed. We have settings done for H323 and that is enabled. We also have done some dial plans. So for the default dial plan, there is now dial rules that will allow us to dial externally. So all of those things are pre-configured already in the system. The next step would be simply to go to the firewall and start configuring the firewall ports. So as I'm getting ready to configure the firewall and the firewall rules, I have opened the report CVS file that we downloaded from the web tool, and I can now use it to see exactly what ports I need to open for each specific call leg. So I have cleaned it up a little bit, and I also added the filtering options. So I can now go in and say I'm really only interested in any public IP address trying to communicate to my DMA Edge IP interface on the DMZ. And here I can then see exactly which destination ports, which protocols needs to be opened in that direction. So I need to open port 17 and 18, and again I only need to open those if I really want external gatekeepers to be able to communicate in to the solution. So that's something that you could choose not to open. Port 1720, it's H323 signaling calling ports that one needs to be open. It's a small error here, but this is really port 5060 and 5061 that needs to be opened. Then we have a UDP TCP port range for media. We have another one that is for H.264, so again this is media with H.323. There are two included in here, so I'm working in a beta environment that are turn related. I will not add those as they are not necessary for this setup that I have. So let's get cracking with configuring the firewall. And before we get cracking in the firewall, of course, I should show you as well the second leg, and that's the one that's interesting, from pretty much saying that anything that my DMA edge IP address will be sending to the internet. So again, this is a bunch of IP addresses and ports that I will add, and this is literally the source ports that the DMA will use to connect externally. If you want to be a bit lazy, you could also go in and say that I want to allow the DMA edge DMZ IP address to talk to anyone over any port on the internet as well, and then you will only have one rule. But I still think best practice is really making sure that you're tying down everything and only allowing communication on the ports that is really needed. So in my demo environment, I'm using a pfSense firewall. This is a free firewall that you can download, free to use. So a great thing with free communities for demo environment. What I pretty much have pre-configured on this one is that I have a WAN interface, that is the public IP address. I have a DMZ interface, and I have a one-to-one NAT between them. So if I go into my NAT settings, I look at my one-to-one, I can see that anything coming into this IP address will be forwarded to the internal IP address, which is my DMA edge in that zone. With that being set, I can then move on to do the firewall rules. The firewall rules I have set up in here is the UDP to 1719. As you can see over here, I'm skipping the 1718. I have TCP to 1720. I have set up TCP UDP to port 5060, so I'm allowing both of those. I have set up as well TCP media range 35001 to 40,000 and 23002 to 28500. An example, just looking at what the rule entails, is that I'm allowing it to pass on my internet WAN interface. I'm allowing anyone on the internet to do it. If you want to be real particular, you could specify that the source port coming from the outside should be above 1023. I'm not that particular, and then I pretty much pointed to the DMA edge IP address, and then I have set a name on to it, so I know which one it is. If I look at the TCP, the SIP ports, it's the same thing. Everything looks the same. The only thing is the difference is the ports that I'm allowing. And then as a final setting as well, we could look at the media traversal ports, and as you can see here, everything is set up to pass, and then it's the TCP port 23002 to 28500. So fairly easy setup to do to get the firewall rules to work. What I also have set up is, of course, firewall rules from the DMZ. So again, if I go in here and I change my IP address, so I'm really interested in what the DMA is going to send out, and it's the source ports over here. You can see I have a direct correlation between the different ports, and it's just a matter of setting them up, and pretty much I'm allowing them to go anywhere. So that's the biggest difference looking at it. So before I had anyone coming to me, now I'm passing my single IP address to anyone on the internet on any port range. since I don't know what I'm going to connect to and what source ports they are using, I'm allowing everything on that end. And with these, I don't know what's the total, 10 or 11 firewall rules. We are now ready to register a video endpoint to the DMA internally and do a test call and see if it works. So to allow the device to register, I'm gonna just do a quick example where I whitelist the IP address of this device and allow it to register to the network. So I will do this by going into ACLs and create a list under ACL variables. So allow registration. And then we're going to do this just for zip, and then I'm going to add a value, and the value I'm going to do is just the IP address of my device as a simple example. Once I created this list, I can now point the rule to it. So I can go in again and I can create a rule, and I will call it again, it's for zip, and then I can do a condition, and the whole access listing is a completely different one that I will not go into this time, but pretty much what I'm going to say is the request source IP is contained in, and then I will choose my allowed, oh, I spelled it wrong, allow registration, and hit OK. And as a final thing, I would then need to go in under the access rule and my factory edge, and then I will add the rule that I just created. So the allow, where is it? Registration allowed. I will allow it and zip, and I'm going to move it up before the first denial rule. So you now have the zip scanners and everything that's going to deny it. Then you have a few things that is allowed, and one of them is the registration. But then go back to my represent desktop. You can now see that the device is truly active and it's registered. And if I go in under monitoring and I look at the endpoints, I can see that I now have accepted registration to it. So the last step is actually to place a test call and see how that works. So let's close this one and let's enter the test address to our RealConnect cloud service and hit call. And we can see that it starts connect, and